Hello, every folks, and good morning. So today we're going to be talking about the Lord in the Tactics Ogre game. So specifically, we're going to be sticking with the various variants of Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together / Reborn here. Technically, there's going to be 4 different flavors of this whole thing. But specifically, what we're going to be doing here is kind of exploring the journey that the Lord takes to get to where it is in Reborn, as well as the interesting stuff they did with it in One Vision. And as a little bit of a side note, we're also going to be looking at how it's compared with the Ranger over time, since they're kind of rivals, and it's just kind of funny to see the comparison between the two. So let's go ahead and get this thing started. So this is going to be a kind of mix of some of the stuff we'll be covering in-game, some of the stuff we'll be covering from online resources. Some of them, like for example the SNES version or One Vision, will be a lot easier to cover with everything out on one graph, and conveniently somebody already made those graphs, so thank you to those people. But when it comes to some of the other ones, like Reborn, typically it's a lot easier to show off in-game. So let's go ahead and get to it here. So original Lord, and frankly all versions of Lord, ended up coming about in any timeline. The Kashua does not end up surviving towards the end of the story. Through whatever means, whether her own means, somebody else's means. If you just decide to rescue her and throw her into a freaking volcano, who knows? Whatever situation happens that she doesn't make it, you get yourself the option to be a Lord. Now, in the case of the SNES version, this is a one-time offer upon getting back, and if you decide not to take it, you've lost access to Lord. If you do take it, you can't become any other class. So you either take it or you don't. Now, the funny part is, they decided to go for a sticking the main character in a good boy archetype thing. Tactics Ogre in general does a pretty good job of dodging a lot of stereotypes, but like, when it comes to that stereotype, original classic Lord was definitely that. PSP version Lord was trying to get out of it, but still kind of locked in there. Whereas the other versions actually did succeed in getting him out of that archetype finally. Now, this class in its original version does not actually have access to all magic like you would assume. He does have access to almost all magic in later versions, as well as almost all abilities in later versions. In this particular one, of all random things, he gains the ability to walk on water, and additionally has access to Attack Plus, which is basically dual wield. So if you have any two-handed weapons, you can go ahead and use them. He's specialized in swords, and realistically there's not really many other one-handed weapons that you'd really go for, so yeah, pretty much. I mean, you're basically stuck with swords. For those unfamiliar with the classic version, you had way fewer weapon choices. So usually if you were running dual wield, if you were running sword and board, you were probably running sword. When it came to heavier weapons and whatnot, there was only one type of one-handed axe in the game, for example, and that was the flanca, aka the hand axe that you started the game with. From there on out, every other one was two-handed. Hammers were often in a similar position there. So in most cases, you were probably running swords if running dual-wielding, so there's that. As far as their magic access goes, though, they only have access to 4 spells, and this actually kind of almost screwed me over during the Griffin only run. So I don't know how many here watched that thing, but about a year ago, I was doing a Griffin only run of Tactics Ogre SNES, and got to the very end, and there's a lot of undead units to deal with. Undead units became a practical, almost soft lock multiple times over the course of that run, and so I kept thinking, man, I really should just switch him to something else, and it was one of these cases where technically I had to keep him as a beast tamer for the purposes of sticking with that challenge, so I kept trying to use whatever options were there, like trying to convince zombies to join you, but you couldn't convince zombies to join you normally in that one. You could convince skeletons and ghosts, but apparently the ones that actually have a functioning vocal cord you can't talk to. But anyway, so as far as all that goes, yeah, it became really awkward. So I thought, oh wow, the Lord is a forced switch. I accidentally switched him into Lord over the course of that whole thing. So I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna go use Exorcism on him, and he doesn't have access to Exorcism, or most spells for that matter. He just has Heal, Vitalize, Heal Plus, and Heal All. AKA basically just Heal All is just going to be the best thing on here. Heal spells in the original were kind of odd. Heal was your kind of standard heal. Heal Plus was your area heal. Vitalize was basically ease. Heal All, on the other hand, was basically a full heal with no range restriction that was cheaper than many other heal spells. So, actually, I forget exactly what the exact cost was, but I remember Heal All being suspiciously cheap for a full heal that you could snipe anywhere on the map. Anyway, So either way, his original variant here was essentially a dual-wielding guy. This was very important for SNES, seeing as most classes, unless they had dual-wield, usually didn't have the kind of Alpha Strike potential to like safely attack something. So like for example, in later versions, you could, let's say, attach a stun to your weapon in PSP, and then you'd be safe to attack something. Or let's say you would just have really high evasion or really high defense or something like that. In the SNES version, if a unit attacked, they were almost always getting counterattacked, and there were few ways to actually block that counterattack from coming in. But additionally, in most cases, this just meant that you just wound up even, that there wasn't really a scale of counterattacks, as it were. Like in PSP, it was tiered out over time. In something like Reborn, it's again just tiered out as the weapons get better. In this original version, it was just like you hit that guy for half his health, he hits you for half your health. So unless you're able to get the kill, most of the time it's not worth actually charging in with your melee units. And remember that there was no death countdown, you just instantly died if their health hit 0. So usually dual wielders were the ones that actually did the attacking. Everybody else stood there with their sword and shield, hoping to counterattack something and hopefully survive. Anyway, so with that said, yeah, good that he is dual wielding. He's got pretty solid stats across the board, great growths for everything here. Unusual quirk about this class is again the low MP, because if you ran anything other than a magic class, which as far as I've seen, most folks prefer to run their Lord as, you know, a physical guy, somebody defensive, because you want to keep your king safe, so to speak. And this usually meant that their MP was too low to use many things. So either way, very low MP, they might not even have the magic that they need to actually cast a lot of the magic that would be available, even if they could use it. Again, like in my case, he couldn't use Exorcism, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because even if he could, he just didn't have the MP to do it. Anyhow, so yeah, solid overall, great physical attacker, very limited in terms of skills and magic and whatever else. His main bread and butter thing is that he's got 2 swords. Arguably, though, you probably could just go Swordmaster and basically achieve the same thing with him if you went down that route. But it is what it is. For those that didn't know, in Classic SNES, when it came to Denim, he actually was locked into one of 3 classes as far as advanced classes went. Like, if you stuck with, let's say, a Wizard or Warlock, Caster, or whatever else, your pool of classes was limited based off of your route. So, for example, a Chaotic unit would have access to stuff like Ninjas or Wizards, I believe, but they wouldn't have access to stuff like Clerics or Knights or what have you, and ultimately their kind of best class, so to speak, would be the Terra Knight. Let's say somebody like Neutral would potentially wind up with a bigger selection of classes overall, but they would end up landing on the, I believe theirs is the Dragoon that they get, giving them access to Support Magic, which they got back in the original here. So Support Magic was just kind of buffs, and I think it was buffs and debuffs, if I recall correctly. We can actually double check that real quick. Yeah, so like the Dragoon of the advanced classes, I personally loved Neutral for everything, but in terms of the original here, we had the Dragoon here that was especially good against dragons. They got a damage bonus versus them. They were still doing the whole sword thing. Basically min-maxed for strength and dexterity for offense. They get access to area of effect spells, as well as Snapshot, which is basically a Snapdragon. Meanwhile, the Swordmaster, if you went down the law route, and were a Jedi in that case, you got a huge amount of access for spells here, with stun, a weapon buff, damage bursting buff there, some poison, some jumps, petrify, some healing rain, some slow moves. They went nutty with the amount of spells that the Swordmaster got in that one. Yeah, the Swordmaster changed a ton over the years, but they were a solid fighter. They also got two-handed swords and such. Or sorry, they could also do the attack plus thing, so they also got dual wield. But seriously, Swordmaster outside of growths, they sacrifice some strength for some dexterity. For comparison here, it's looking at the two. Lord gets 1 more HP, gets 1 more MP, gets 2 more strength, gets a decent bit more vitality with 2 extra. Intelligence is the same. Let's see. For Mind, Swordmaster ends up winning for having better accuracy with some debuffs, though funnily enough, it's agility that actually scales for something like Petrify, which they have a match score, and then he wins on dexterity as well. So overall, stats-wise, it's it's kind of a give and a take. Personally, I would take Swordmaster over Lord because Heal Rain is basically Heal Plus, but it's water. Clear is going to also help with a... I think that one gets rid of only poison, if I recall correctly. I'm not sure off the top of my head. Usually you don't use them for getting rid of debuffs that often. Any darn ways, though. And then the Terenius just kind of gets screwed, if you ask me, because they're like, oh, the attack power of enemies within 3 paneled ranges will be reduced. If anybody ever realized this at all, like, if anybody actually saw this, do let me know. Because, like, they don't even get MP growth. They don't use MP at all. They get better strength and dexterity and stuff, but allegedly they reduce the combat of units of stuff nearby. Like, they're good on stats. Their defense is fantastic, which is ironic because then they became a complete piece of tissue paper when it came to PSP. But anyways, so yeah, it's slow and bulky and also has a 30 kill requirement. Very, very odd comparison between them. Because, like, would you like all the spells ever? Would you like to be able to kill dragons real good and also get some spells on there? Or would you like to slow down, be very, you know, clunky, but you're specialized in axes, I guess, so that's slightly more damage in axes, and allegedly have a debuff that you'll never notice. And then you got Lord over here, who's got the better stats and then some heals? Anyway. It's interesting. It's interesting. But I personally would take Swordmaster over Lord, but that's just me. Anyway, so let's go ahead and look at how this went on as time went. Okay, so next we're going to do a mix of both. We're going to show it in-game, but we're also going to just take a look at the incorrect fandom wiki over here, because they got some stuff that's just plain wrong on here, so let's go ahead and continue on. So, Lord, like it says here, you know, you get it once again once Cashua dies. This time it's available from a class mark rather than being a permanent change, and in many cases it can be seen as his best class. As far as growths go, we got a preference towards strength and dex again, with generally balanced stats across the board. For basically everything, slight edge towards attack scores there. And nothing really special as far as inbuilt abilities here. As far as weapons go, this is actually kind of where the class gets almost uniquely screwed. Because as far as the Lord goes in PSP, it is on paper really good, and then you start, it's one of these classes that every time you have an idea, you start going towards that idea, and it's like, oh man, I'm going to do something other than Divine Lord again. No, you won't. So let's take a look here. So they get access to almost all weapon types. They don't get access to guns, because I guess he's just nervous about guns after you know what happens. But also, he's almost uniquely screwed as far as a lot of set effects go. So body armor type, he can only equip heavy types. Other armors, all except mage and female exclusives, though there's actually more limitations on this. We'll get to that later. And then shields, it says all except Ogre Shield, which I'm pretty sure there's exceptions there too, but I could be mistaken on that. Also, he's not allowed to use the Rose Whip for whatever reason. Now, let's go ahead and switch over to in-game now. Or in-game, and here's the funny thing. Like many other kind of special classes in not One Vision, but in PSP, the funny part about this is that there's a pretty huge kind of prevalence towards Divine. Now, why is this? Because basically every spell has, or every class has the basics. You got your AoEs, you got your missiles, you got your summons, you got your not quite Draconics, but what am I thinking of? The Apocrypha. You've got your instills, your guards, your buffs, your debuffs, etc. And while they all have one or two things, when it comes to Divine, they also get resurrections, they get area heals, they get regular heals, they get ease, they get decurse and stuff like that. There's a lot of kind of support abilities that Divine gets that it's really convenient to have in one place. You're pretty much always going to be running Divine on him, because not only are Divine weapons and such easier to get a hold of, it's something you've probably been training up to this point. It's something that generally has more options. As far as other debuffs go, if you really need them that bad, all you need is Spell Strike anyway, so that's basically something you can cast off of scrolls. And again, when it comes to actually just casting for yourself, typically it's a lot easier to have Divine on you than anything else. Additionally then, as far as his equipment goes, when it comes to bonuses, he's actually kind of weirdly limited as far as his equipment goes. Just being locked into to heavy armor means that he doesn't get access to, for example, stuff like the vests or robes or anything like that. So, despite having access to some casting gear, he's not really going to be much of a caster. He does have access to several arm guards and whatever else, but it actually forgot to mention earlier that he doesn't have access to all pieces, like I was mentioning. So, for example, things like the Jigla set, he doesn't get access to. Things like the Ogre set, he gets partial access to, in that he can use the Ogre set, but not the coolest version of the Ogre set. So, like, you'd think with the Lord, you could go run, something like Ogre set crossbow, and you can't. You specifically have to run the two-handed version, which isn't a problem in other versions of the game, but in this one, the Ogre Blade is just kind of really... Just two-handers in general are kind of meh in PSP. Not to mention it takes away a lot of his options for having different weapons in different hands. He still has the same old thing of being able to dual-wield, and with access to all weapon types, he could potentially do funny things with cursed weapons. But realistically speaking, you probably are just going to be running standard swords on this guy, as you do. Usually, something like Brynhildr and something else, because fear-proof is just a very useful thing. But that's the thing. Like, whichever direction you look at it, he's almost always going to just kind of prefer going down the light route. The other stuff you can do, but it always will just kind of feel like there's other stuff that light could be doing better in that particular situation. He does get access to a lot of things, though, and thankfully this time around he did get access to almost all magic types, though again we kind of fall into the same, he likes light thing. However, he doesn't get access to ninja spells, he doesn't get access to war dances, he doesn't get access to songs, or necromancies, or I think he does get all Draconics. I wanted to say there was a limitation, but I guess he does get some Draconics, though it is worth noting that on this one, as you'll notice, that you will cost reagents every time that you're going and casting Draconics, and this is oftentimes why people would just not end up using them, because while they were okay, you have to spend let's say 5 of a consumable, right? And look at this math right here. So, let's say you go cast, let's go ahead and compare Starfall with Heaven Judge, right? So for Starfall, you have to, I believe, get to the bottom of Palace of the Dead. It's going to cast 5 Worm Gems and 140 MP. This is potentially the entire fight's worth of MP built up, unless you are going and using very expensive MP items to go build it up. And why are you using the spell? Effectively to just kind of long-range nuke some undead and exercise them at the same time. Okay, cool, except that there is a PSP limitation on this one, where the undead will get knocked down by Starfall, but you have to hit them a second time in order to actually exercise them. This is oftentimes why folks would carry around, for example, Starfall in their pocket as a sort of version of exorcism that also does damage. Whereas Heaven Judge will be dropped in San Bronze, and let's go ahead and compare that one next to it. So remember those 5 consumables that they're using? The funny part about this is that the 5 consumables that are used, they have a maximum stack of 99. So you literally can't even, they don't even let it round up to 100. You're just stuck at 99, meaning that there's only a certain amount of casts that you can do for it in a best case scenario. Heaven Judge, on the other hand, not only doesn't require a separate type of magic school to be learned in order to use it, it's available at the same level for the exact same cost at slightly less range, but will be doing more damage, will not require any reagents to cast, and additionally will exercise on kill. So it's just funny that despite requiring almost the same amount of effort between the two, it's just way easier to usually use the basic variants rather than anything for Draconics in this version. Like, hell, friggin' Sacrifice, which revives a single incapacitated unit in exchange for the caster's life. 200 MP, 3 Worm Gems. It's a one-time drop from some random angel or some bullshit in San Bronze. Meanwhile, you could have used you could have used Resurrection. Resurrection 2 drops in basically the same place. Doesn't require Draconics to learn, doesn't require consumables, same MP cost, and just resurrect somebody with more or less complete health without needing to sacrifice yourself, whereas regular Resurrection will just bring him back for half the MP cost, or you can just use a Blessing Stone. It was weird that they had these ideas and then just went completely wild with screwing over Draconics in this one. Like, on paper, this should have been amazing, and in Reborn, they certainly are. They were real bad this time around, though. Okay. So yeah, that's about that. They get access to a lot of equipment. They're weirdly limited in terms of set effects. Again, the biggest one for this one being the unfortunate loss of the Jiggy set, which they end up not being able to use 2/3 of, just because, you know, Jiggy Dark Coat is too lightweight. He has to equip some heavier armor, except he can't even use can't use the Thanatos armor. It wouldn't complete the set, but it also means that he doesn't get access to the Dark Deed set either. Let's see where it is for Stinky in this case. So we get Reeking. Does he get Glistening? He does get Glistening. And I'm pretty sure he can use the Odiferous Waster, so he's probably good there. Yeah, there we go. So he can at least go Stinky on you, so there's that, I suppose. You know, just go for some Medusa Shield, maybe. There we go. We have a Lord build that isn't... Oh, no, wait, Medusa Shield is Divine, too. Can we undivine that shield? Aegis is also Divine. So, Shield of Sages. Okay, let's, you know what? Just get a Rosenzi. Sure. Classic design. We'll just get a Rosenzi on there. There you go. You get your +2 parry bonus. Fantastic. So, either way, it's weird. Like, it's got a bunch of very oddly specific limitations in this version, right? So, okay. That's going to be PSP Lord. Now we move on to one... Okie dokie, so let's talk One Vision here real quick. So, in terms of OV, we have the Lord/Lady. The reason that that's here is because the if you switch if you use cheats to go cheat in a Lady instead of a Lord, it won't crash the game anymore in One Vision. Because, you know, they were given a unique sprite and everything. So yeah, as far as this class goes, its growths are going to be, as always, kind of balanced across the board, with a almost exact balance in everything. The Lord's whole thing is being a completely just custom create a class type situation that they leaned in pretty hard into that in this one. So completely even stats except for Vitality. Everything is lower Vitality in One Vision. That's why you want more Vitality from your heavy armor and stuff. Stutch again? Really, Brain? Anyway, so going down here, they have access to basically all weapon types, just completely across the board, including Fusils. They have access to all shield types, all armor types, all gear types, and additionally have access to built-in unique abilities, with the Key Strike and Flicker being the same that the Swordmaster gets. Additionally, they get access to every single spell in the game, which is just quite the list, frankly. If you want to be scrolling through this thing for the next 8 years, you can technically give them all of these at the same time, which is, I mean, you can definitely do that to yourself, but this includes the war dances, this includes the entire Art of War category, which will include things like your ninja magic, your decoys, your dances, things like that. So they finally got some moves. They can finally dance. As far as skills go, they get access to almost all abilities, but not all. So they get access to all magic schools, all weapon types, all augment types, as well as most racial types. They still don't get access to anatomy because that is broken. Parry, deflect, and overpower. Rampart aura up to rank 4. Counterattack up to 3. Bash up to 3. Clarity up to 4. Efficacy up to 3. Jump up to 2. They get Sanctuary, Field Alchemy up to 2, so max rank on that. Dual Wield is kind of expected at this point. Max rank of max CP as well as Tactician, Reflect Damage, all of that. However, when it comes to the skills that they can carry in from other classes, they can usually bring the secondary abilities from every class, but not necessarily the main one in a lot of cases. So, for example, from the Warrior, they get Mighty Strike, but they don't get the double. They get Tremendous Shot, but not Eagle Eye from the Archer. From the Wizard, they get Meditate, but not Extend. From the Cleric, they get Tabula Rasa, but not Mother's Blessing. They get HP Infusion from the Fencer, but they don't get access to stuff like MP Infusion or Conserve MP. From the Knight, they get Phalanx, but not Aegis. They get Fearful Impact, but not Lament from the Terenius. Hopefully you get the general idea here. They get some of the abilities, but not all of them. They get like a little bit of kind of a taster of every class, rather than getting all of them. So, and simply put, because a lot of the other abilities are preposterously nutty. Like, a lot of the stuff that they have access to, combined with, let's say, the Warlock's ability to just distill TP and whatnot, would kind of be a bit of a menace of a thing. But this means that there's less kind of choice paralysis when it comes to stacking them on, on more of one class than another, and you're given more of an incentive to kind of expand out your choices between these different classes, So like if you're going for a custom created class, Lord will do that job, but it's not objectively better than every other class in the game, that it is very customizable. You can use it to tailor fit something that you want, but you also don't necessarily have to use it at the absolute exclusion of everything else, and to me, that's a very comforting thought. Because it's just nice that it's nice knowing that you don't have to use Lord if you want to play optimally. That's one of those things that always kind of bugged me in PSP. Even though in PSP you could argue that the other classes were just more fun, but Lord always felt very dry to me in PSP. It felt a bit of a letdown back in SNES. Like nice stats, but dude, where's your abilities? And then in Reborn, they just absolutely thoroughly kick ass. Like, Lord is basically just the every class in Reborn. But I want to point out, what it mentions down here as far as availability for Denim, this is true. However, it's also worth noting that you actually can pick up Lord on other routes as well. You don't have to have had Kashua killed off. All you need is to get access to the class mark, and you can actually forge a fake class mark once you get access to Pirate's Graveyard. I believe I made a video on that not that long ago, but yeah, once you have access to forgery, you can just forge your own class mark for the Lord. So that's all well and neat. Like I know personally, on my most recent playthrough of One Vision, I've been running him as a Warlock. It's just the Warlock has stuff that the Lord doesn't have, and that's really what I want. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to Reborn next. Alright, and then finally we have Reborn Lord, which is just like the chatliest MFer that's ever existed. So, as far as the Lord in Reborn, it's a class that has access to, once again, almost every single spell, having access to basically everything with exception to Necromancy, Ninja stuff, War Dances, and Songs, which is perfectly fine considering they get pretty much everything else. Their Draconics end up slotting in particularly nicely, especially with things like Gift of Renewal being buffed to hell, Nullify Strike being extremely good, Teleport being extremely good, Sacrifice being really solid when it can be cast for free. Not to mention Sacrifice costs half the MP cost and no consumables compared to PSP. Like, it's wild how much of a glow up Draconics got. And hell, even when people were criticizing Draconics when Reborn first came out, it's like, dude, this still has the longest range in the game. This is just basically nuking something from a million miles away. Like, it's 6 range, sure, but then 9 range with Extend, and then you further have up to 12 range with a good staff, and then on top of that, it has 2 extra ticks of AoE range, so you're basically potentially hitting stuff up to like 14 tiles away with this thing. So either way, really good, not to mention it is almost half the cost of what it was back in PSP there. So yeah, they may seem, by comparison, they aren't going to have the single target damage of a summon landed on one guy, but they have seen one hell of a glow up since the past. And actually, one more thing I should point out, Draconics, despite receiving a glow up here, they still were technically kinda sorta the strongest thing in SNES, but not really. They were kind of this map-wide AoE that would just smart bomb everything, except, well, I say smart bomb everything. It was Starfall that could smart bomb everything. All the other ones ended up hitting your own units too, so it was supposed to be doing that whole lore thing with, like, same thing as the Apocrypha there, where it's just like it hits the entire map and they're like, oh no, you killed your own guys and the other guys, except the Lord couldn't use it. So either way, each prefer their own for sure, but as far as I'm concerned, this is my favorite version of the Draconics, just because they're the most convenient to use, there's no additional consumables required, there's no need to worry about accidentally deleting your own units, not to mention Starfall is just very, very convenient, because now it got the function of being able to delete units, just like Heaven Judge does, because that's a distinction the game never brings up, and it's weird that it never does. Anyway, so as far as skills go, the Lord, once again, transfers in skills from everywhere. They still do not have access to Fusils, unlike One Vision there. However, they do get access to surprisingly more skills in Reborn than they do in OV. So we get Pincer 4 from the Berserker, we get Steadfast from various heavy units, Rampart Aura from most of the Night variants, Sanctuary from most of them, Double Attack because of course, Siege because of course, Resist Petrify and Resist Charm, still wondering what they're doing here, but being thankful for the opportunity. Lobber 4 Lobber, which again is basically the Lobber +1 but improved in both directions from the PSP version, but now it's a skill and doesn't require ridiculous amounts of side questing to get a hold of. Every single recruit skill. Additionally, we have Evanescence for being able to play dead, Sanctuary Shadow for being able to put up a Sanctuary Shadow, Gorgon Key for unlocking golems, Shadow Break if you want to be disappointed, Dragon's Wound for being an improved version of Slayer in a lot of cases, Rampart Shadow for blocking the way but only for 3 turns. I don't know why they hate the skill so much. Moving on. Empower Beast, Empower Dragon, Empower Golem, First Aid, which just like the PSP version is the only skill that they learn naturally as this class, but it will just kind of heal in the area. It's just a little trickle regeneration heal. However, it's worth noting that in Reborn, if you do run a full auto skill list, which the Lord is really, really good at, like I would personally recommend always running full auto skills on Lord, personally, but this basically just gives them constant regeneration, and then you can combine that with things like Conserve RT, Conserve MP, and a Speed Boost to permanently be running haste, permanently regenerating. Your actions don't take time, your casts don't take MP. Like, the Lord is thoroughly broken in the most fun way in Reborn here. But yeah, Lament of the Dead, Mighty Strike, Eagle Eye, Preempt, Evade, Engulf, Guardian Force, which I'm not sure why I use Guardian Force on him except for the Warren fight. We got the Golem abilities, Mind's Eye, Salvation from the Lich, Conserve MP from the Fencer, Conserve RT from the Wizard, Speed Star from the Buccaneer, Nature's Touch from a lot of Wizard classes. No, this isn't exclusive to Shaman. Stop trying to leave me comments about that. Mother's Blessing from the Cleric, Mother's Mercy also from the Cleric, also extremely broken on this guy in the exact same way that it's broken in One Vision with Tabula Rasa. We've got Double Impact. No Double Impact and Double Strike do not stack. Yes, that is a bummer. Double Shot, Fearful Impact, but you can do double shots and Slayer skills with this guy, which is pretty fantastic. Technically, you can do Dragon Slayer and Double Shot and Tremendous Shot and whatever else stacks on the Archer, but it's, you can do Beast Slayer stuff on this one. So you can one-shot chickens. He's the best chicken hunter in the game. Tremendous Shot, Beast Slayer, we got Back Attack on there, which certainly exists. You probably wouldn't be using it this late in the game. Berserk for AoEs. This also can combine with Spears for the first time officially in the series. Actually, come to think of it, could you use Berserk? Let me double check that real quick. Actually, no, I think you could use Berserk back on this guy, couldn't you? Because I think, it's not even going to tell me. Well, whatever, this can go away. I think you actually could use Spear Berserk back in PSP, because it does have the mechanism for it to deal with. And, yeah, basically, the main takeaway from this whole thing is he basically gets every single skill in the game at this point. Not even limited to kind of partial stuff. He literally never got Swordmaster stuff before, now he does. Didn't get access to a lot of Terenius stuff before, now he does. He basically gets, actually freaking everything. But the funny thing here is that there's sort of like a almost Pokemon-esque thing going on, where he has to go and acquire that class to get those skills. So, for example, you may have noticed he doesn't have Necromancer skills on there at the moment, and that's simply put because on this particular save file I haven't gotten Cresta yet. And so this means that there's kind of additional reason to do certain side quests. Like, you can't get the full skill list on the Lord, technically, without doing the Cresta side quest or getting Azelston and whatnot. That instead of just going and kind of trying to find ways to grind out for it, you essentially get them through game progress, which feels pretty cool. Additionally, kind of had a little bit of a funny quirk where if, for example, let's say you had him learn Phalanx back when he was a knight in Chapter 1, and then you switched him out of it, he actually would still retain that same rank, so you would have to switch him there and back to get the higher rank of the thing, which is kind of neat. Anyway, so yeah, I would say this is definitely the most smooth flowing of the bunch here, considering, again, you can just basically go full auto skills with this. You just break a prop at the start of the fight, break a second prop on your second turn, and at that point it's like, yeah, stuff doesn't take time, we're on permanent speed mode, permanent invincibility, casts for free, like Starfalls, Resurrections everywhere, just go ahead and throw on a paradigm shift or what have you. Sure, that's just free now. Let's go ahead. Like, Starfall's all well and good, but why don't we, why don't we just decide to go for, like, long-range Earthquakes or Guy Strikes, what have you? Sure, why the hell not? Free Nullify Strikes, or just get regeneration going on everybody. It's just good stuff, So I would say, in general, I think Reborn Lord's probably my favorite of the bunch. But now let's go ahead and compare real quick with how Vice has been doing this entire time. Because he's always been trying to keep up. The dude's always been a tryhard. So how exactly has he looked this whole time? Going back to this music because it's called Three Kings. Technically, we're talking about Four Kings, but dang it, we're going to do this anyway. So, okay, let's go ahead and now compare Lord with Ranger, which originally was Warrior, because Warrior was originally Soldier. Anyway, whatever. So, he actually has higher health growths, has more or less equal strength and dex by the looks of it, while having slightly less vitality and basically the same MP, but he also gets his Fire Burn, Meteor, Acid Burn, Incubus, all that kind of thing. He additionally does have the dual wield as well. So he is basically a Swordmaster for all intents and purposes, which is weird because he basically is just a more strength-orientated neutral Swordmaster rather than being Law. Although he is neutral and you gotta be on Law, so technically if you're on Law, you would also be a Swordmaster. So I guess he's still kind of looking up to Denim in this case. I'm not sure, but it's just kind of an interesting one to think about. Anyway. As far as Warrior goes, basically it's just on him. I forget if he's actually able to change classes. I'm not sure if he can. I don't think he can. I think he is just locked into Warrior there. So either way, decent jack of all trades, relatively comparable as a sort of slightly more offensive and less defensive version of the Lord for Vice here. He is in his ultimate form. He has achieved optimal douchiness, and let's see how he looked in PSP then. All right, in this one, the fandom wiki thingy does actually kind of have it right on the nose here, in which this is the guy that you use for the Jiggler set. Just basically about it. So he is a physical fighter, technically a bit more on the frail side, a bit more on the evasive side. Generally speaking, this is just the guy you gave the Jiggy set to. And yeah, let's go ahead and continue on down here. So he gets fists, daggers, swords, one-handed swords, axes, bows, crossbows, two-handed fusils, and thrown weapons. So thrown weapons basically just became the Lobber for Reborn later, but anyways. So this is usable by Vice and Azelston. Interestingly enough, Vice ended up getting access to Ranger. I don't believe, Vice ended up getting access to Buccaneer. I don't believe that Azelston got access to Ranger in Reborn. We'll double check that in a moment. Alrighty, in fact, we're actually going to double check that right now, and yeah, sure enough, how about that? Azelston has access to Ranger. I mean, I don't really care, but it's kind of interesting that it's there. Anyway, let's move on. What's the deal with him being just strictly a bow guy in PSP? Simply put, when it came to the other weapons, it just really, really, really didn't compare. So, okay, so let's look at this real quick. So, like, for example, with the Jiggy set, without going and building him out for these skills in particular, basically, Jiggler set, by the time that you could get a hold of the full set, more than likely was capable of one-shotting anything in the story point blank. And this was at a pretty darn long range. So by the time you got to that point, you probably had your augments, your racials, your bow skills, things like that already figured out. So either way, this tended to be really, really solid. Additionally, he came in with a pretty notable dexterity bonus, which meant that he was especially strong at being a bit of a glass cannon. In many ways, he was sort of seen as the more offensive and less defensive version of the ninja, which could theoretically become dang near invincible in this version. There were a lot of weird quirks to this class, though. So, like, for example, Disarm, for being able to disarm a trap in an adjacent tile. No one in existence has ever actually used this. Back attack, which was interestingly limited to the Ranger and Buccaneer in this version, caused all attacks to be hit as if they were being made to the target's back. This was weird because if this was a passive, it would have been very useful for him with his just kind of single shot kill thing that he's got going on with a Jiggy Bow. Unfortunately, it is a star move, which means that it will erase any other activated moves at the time. So this basically means that this was the one time that it probably could have maybe been useful as a sniping move, but realistically, nobody used back attack back then either. This oftentimes gets mixed up with the rogue's sneak attack, which basically became Pincer 4 in Reborn. But anyways, back attack was also just not very useful in this version. He got recruit because of course he does. He has first aid with bind, shackle, and stop. Funnily enough, even though this was already bad in Reborn, in this version, its base success rate, I believe, was only 30%, and you had to use it over and over in order to actually rank it up. Imagine how many people did that when its ranks go up by like 0.6% at a time. He got access to full field alchemy, double attack, trajectory for telling where he's shooting, jump and swift foot for movement, as well as the proof skills, max rank of constitution, sidestep, as well as dodge. I mean, basically everyone eventually got most of these passives, as it were, here. Max rank of strengthen, most of the ranks of knockback, as well as max rank of counterattack. He's always been a little bit of a basic attacker. Funnily enough, in SNES was probably when he was most varied in terms of his means of attacking stuff, but in this case he got access to daggers. This gave him some spell abilities and such. There really wasn't anything that really stuck out here outside of the Jiggy Bow. Realistically, his defenses were pretty pathetic compared to a lot of the other unique units by this time. So more often than not, you're better off just having him as a long-range sniper. I know personally I tried running him sword and board a bunch of times because that's what he comes with. It felt like it was the intentional route, and he just has a massive hole where his vitality should be. It's his second lowest stat next to his mind, which is very fitting, to be honest. So he somehow went from a hybrid caster that was kind of a swordmaster to being an archer with no magical ability whatsoever, a gigantic weakness to debuffs, as well as next to no defense, which is interesting, but alright, whatever. And again, he pretty much always just became a single-shot archer with more movement in this version. Additionally, it's worth noting, I don't believe he actually has access to Steadfast, if I'm not mistaken. That will become relevant later. But no, I don't believe he has actually... Here, let's go ahead and double-check this real quick. Do you have Steadfast? I don't believe he does. This will become relevant in a bit of a moment. We'll circle back to that one, but yeah, I don't believe he has access to Steadfast. So let's go ahead and now move on to One Vision to see how it's done. Ranger in One Vision, it is a complete blowout in terms of which is the coolest one here. So they are very, very quick in terms of their movement. They're very solid in terms of their numbers, going for a much more weighted kind of speed build type situation. They are first and foremost a straight up assassin of the kind of a get in and get out variety. They're able to equip the sniper set, which is basically the Jiggler set but more convenient. If you have no ranged weapon on them at all, they have a inbuilt poison shuriken, and additionally you can get more of their brave marks from the woods. They have access to all lightweight armors, and additionally you'll notice that they have access to magic and cloth armor as well, because they ended up bringing back the magic spell coverage that they had back in SNES, along with a few extra bells and whistles. On top of this, weapon-wise, they have access to the same old fists, daggers, swords, katanas, cudgels, and whips, so basically getting rid of axes for 1 HKs. In their case, the reason that this is useful is because axes in general in One Vision are more kind of anti-armor type weapons, whereas, for example, a 1 HK will, for example, put 3 targets to sleep at once. It's basically a perfect assassin weapon for them in this case. They have access to lobbers, crossbows, sidearms, and bows, and additionally, we have access to lots of evasion options over here, including the main gauche for a massive amount of extra evasion. So, on top of this, their skill list is preposterous, and it's also available to Denim this time instead of Azelston. Now, let's go ahead and minimize this real quick and show what this looks like in game. So, as far as some of those abilities that we talked about, some of them you might have potentially taken a quick peek and they might have looked alien to you, and that's perfectly fine. So, taking a look at this guy here with all stats maxed out, he's got extremely high agility, so he's not missing his shot. He's actually taking... might notice, as a little bit of a fun thing here, his mind has actually improved pretty significantly, but his resistance has gone down. So he's weaker to magic, but he's better at using it. Most of his offensive stats seem to come from mind rather than intelligence, and additionally, again, he's more the speedy get in and get out sword. Anyway, as far as his skills go, he actually has various unique skills this time around. with, for example, Feather Step having been improved in One Vision, where it not only gets rid of Leaden and Bind, but also gives you an extension to your movement range for getting into position or running away. He's got access to a double shot instead of the instead of the back attack there, allowing him to potentially double up on his kill shots there, just going and double tapping things as it were, as well as booby traps, which typically can do about 50% health damage to whatever they end up hitting, on top of potentially providing a lot of benefits, like some of them will grant you things like Ivory Tower or Hasten or something along those lines, allowing him to potentially set himself up in the right situations. He can use Instills on top of that double shot for potentially insane amounts of extra damage on single shots. This is why we're running a One Vision's version of the Jiggler set in the form of the Sniper set alongside a crossbow. So not only can he double shot on top of Instill Flame, so he's already doing a double attack with the Instill, he's already doing a double attack from that double shot. Using a Cursed Crossbow also gives him a double shot, so he's effectively attacking 6 times with a single attack. And on top of that, we've got Shadow Walk, which this doesn't really work with his crossbow, but it does work with the Yama he's keeping in his offhand. With the Shadow Walk ability essentially being what he uses to kill off Ronway that one time. Being able to warp anywhere within their movement range and activating a sneak attack, meaning that he can just kind of whoop out of existence and pop in behind somebody and just go for that big sneak attack. Finally, a version of the sneak attack that's actually worth using, and a better version of the back attack that nobody used in the first place. So on top of this, due to different spell effects, this means that, for example, he can go for a full fire setup here. He uses the double attack from this thing, and he gets in close using the augment from all of the above mentioned earlier to, let's say, cast a supernova off of the Yama here. His spell access is going to be missiles, basic debuffs, as well as bursts. So bursts are basically like AoEs, but they're at a close range and can't miss. So just a quick little kind of shot around you. Typically, whenever in One Vision there's spellcasters that are on the dumber side or on the less kind of flexible side, so like Dragoons and such, will have access to magic, but it will be of the like I can make an explosion out of my hand kind, rather than I can make a fire tornado over there kind. They're kind of the more blunt option, as it were. And this is really good for those cases where, like, say something is hyper evasive and they're almost dead, and it's like, okay, I can just make a quick explosion, dodge this, you filthy catch. Kind of nonsense. So very convenient for stuff like that. But again, due to most of his casting stats coming from his mind there, this also means he's pretty good with debuffs, and he has access to basic debuffs like Melta here, which will inflict a Weaken and Breach in an area at a bit of a range there. So extremely versatile class, extremely cool class. This is the first time in any version of Tactics Ogre that, outside of just basically the Jiggler set being broken in PSP, that the Ranger has legitimately just been cool to use. So yeah, he does the same stuff that he does in the plot. He does a lot of things that you'd expect him to learn over the course of these games. And by the time you're clearing Palace of the Dead and getting access to like all the various pieces of equipment and whatnot, this class thoroughly kicks ass. Like 6-shot crossbow is just one of my favorite things in stuff like this. I love stacking multi-hit attacks, even if it's not necessarily the best thing. If it does something, it's just weirdly fun to me. Anyway, then lastly, let's go ahead and see how he's handling things over in Reborn there. Alright, so I'm just going to mention this right here real quick while we're kind of looking at Reborn here. He is weirdly picky about his helmets in Reborn. So, like, the Stinky set, he would do so many good things with the Stinky set if he could equip the helmet, but he is prevented from using it. So basically, he's in a position that if he wants to run Stinky set, he has to run a dual-wield build and run Otiferous Waster on his offhand, which is fine. It's interesting. It's just kind of weirdly specific, So as far as the Ranger in Reborn here, he doesn't get access to any spells, and he's strictly a physical attacker. Just like PSP, he is limited in terms of his weapon access. However, this time around, he gets access to Steadfast, and additionally has a reason to be potentially using those weird layouts of multiple attacks here. So, like, his basic build, when you get him without much stat boosting or whatever else, is actually reasonably durable. And so, for example, running something like Constitution rather than a double attack is actually going to be a really solid value. While he has access to the same double attack he's always had, it's oftentimes more useful in his case to actually run something like this, the sort of reborn version of the dual wield build, where, for example, he's got coverage versus a lot of elements. He's got access to a lot of different debuff types over here. And he can just basically sneak around going and whacking stuff over and over using a build like this. And, you know, if we're running Stinky Set, maybe we'll go double attack on him. He's got Lobber for going and using grenades, which, combined with his high weapon skills here, would be, you know, pretty darn reliable in his hands. He is a very good Lobber user. He's a fairly quick unit. Additionally, he's actually tied for Beastmaster in terms of highest movement available when going and using the Lobber, so that's very useful as well. On top of this, while he doesn't exactly have the ridiculous punch that he once did with his Jiggler set, the Brimstone Bow is comically nuts in Reborn, especially for once you get into the late game and whatnot. So you have those cases where, like, you can run Snipe Bracers and Snipe Gators, and let's say combined with something like a Lobber and Steadfast, this actually makes him function somewhat similar to one of the newer classes that One Vision ended up adding, known as the Furia. Where effectively there's somebody that's more or less specializing in attacking against weaker defenses, as it were. Where, like, for example, the Brimstone Bow is ridiculously powerful, specifically against human units or any time that there's an elemental weakness of some kind. So if he finds an ice unit, if he finds a human unit with breached defenses or whatnot, this thing is going to shred them to pieces. Whereas in other cases, you might want to use grenades to go bypass defenses and whatnot. Other times you may want to just go put stuff to sleep or what have you. There's a lot of versatility here, but to my mind, he's basically a faster archer that fires once and has steadfast, meaning that he's less likely to be knocked off cliffs or stuff like that. But additionally, he can still be, for example, a Fusilier if you want him to be having access to the kind of full line of longer, kind of long arms here, as it were. It's fine. I mean, I personally would take Brimstone over the rifles any day of the week, despite the lower attack power, but honestly, it's fine. You should really always be attacking on weakened defenses anyway. He doesn't really necessarily have anything that directly sells him like that, but he's alright. He's alright. Like, it's a weird case where a lot of his skills seem kind of weirdly incongruous with each other. Like, Steadfast, you would assume would be on a tanky unit, but he's not really somebody that you want to be fighting head-to-head with, since his defenses are kind of on the lower end there. He is bulkier, but he's kind of closer to something like a Griffin defense-wise, like high health, low actual defenses. He's got double attacks, but again, the time that it takes for him to swing two weapons, especially the higher-end ones, might be detrimental. Something like his version of First Aid removes only stop, and it's kind of awful. Back attack just kind of improves your accuracy, but he's probably going to be never missing anyway. Recruit is overpowered as always, but then you've got a lot of very specific weapon skills. So to my mind, the best way to utilize this guy is really just kind of running two weapon types as it is here. Axe and Sword was probably my personal favorite there. You just basically can lock in completely to just doing that, and it's pretty good in his hands, Potentially running some debuff weapons if you want to, like, let's say, running daggers and whatnot. If you were to run Poison, apparently I don't have any spare Dragon Fangs available at the moment, but you could do that on him. But really, it's this finisher axis that's going to give him most of his damage in that particular instance, You would kind of be locked into the Otiferous Waster to some degree, but having access to these big punishes here is pretty darn solid, though the kinds of weapons that he gets are, again, just kind of... they're weird. They're weird, man. It's just very oddly specific what he has access to, because it's like he's prevented from reaching his maximum potential in a lot of cases. So, like, this I love as an overall setup here. That's pretty convenient. Here, actually, sorry, I meant to switch out the Rune Axe, not the other thing. elements. Like, this is an okay setup, but it still doesn't really get all of the elemental coverage that you'd like. You could maybe swap out for a crossbow, but that's still only a couple elements. Elemental shortbow, yeah, that would actually give you some pretty solid coverage in this case. Probably maybe swap this for elemental shortbow. Go sword and not sword on this. We'll go ahead and put the Garuda bow on him just to show this. So we still have elemental coverage for 4 different elements. That's pretty solid. That works. His steadfast thing means he's not getting shot off cliffs. Still have room for the lobber to be able to go throw grenades and things. He's good. He's good against a wide variety of different types of defenses. He's just not going to have anything that directly stands out on paper. So he's good enough. He's good enough at what he does. He's okay. He does a good job. His natural stats are far higher than most other units that you get at this point. So a lot of times folks think, the Ranger is just this amazing physical attacker. No, Vice just has higher stats. He just comes in with a little bit of a extra bonus there. But yeah, the class itself is a little bit weird like that, but if you're using it for coverage, it's fine. You're using it just to use Vice, to be honest. There's not anything here that's going to completely blow your mind, but just going for elemental coverage, going for those grenades, it's nice. It's convenient. It's a cool class, just not particularly sexy, as it were. Anyway, that's about that. That's all I got time for here today, so I hope this was interesting, and yeah. Let me know in the comments which versions of what had what. I would say, despite Ranger trying pretty hard in Reborn, gets blown away by the Lord there. They were practically even back on SNES. In PSP, honestly, I think in PSP, Vice actually kind of won that one. And in One Vision, I could probably see Vice actually winning that fight every time. Potentially in One Vision. That might be a video for another day. Anyway, so that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.